Well, welcome to the Modern Web plus Angular Meetup. My name is Tracy at Lady Leet. I'm one of your co-hosts today, as well as Stephen Fluin, who is somewhere. I don't know. Where is Stephen anyways? He must have run somewhere. But anyways, wanted to go ahead and thank the two sponsors of this meetup, which is the Angular team, which is sponsoring all the food. Round of applause for the Angular team for providing us with great food. That's not pizza. And then also this.labs, which is my company that I started about a year ago, where we do really awesome consulting, staff augmentation, and mentoring, just trying to help large companies do anything related to the front end. So check that out when you get the chance. A few announcements. This weekend, I sniped Ben into spending 8 hours with me in a conference room, and we recorded the newest ArcsJS workshop. So it's ArcsJS 5.5.4, which was just released, right, Ben? 5.5.5. Ooh, the workshop is out of date. But anyways, you can check that out at arcsworkshop.com. It has the pipeable / lettable / functional operators included in it, whatever you would like to call it. Another announcement is I'm also a co-organizer of a Google developer group. So GDG DevFest season is upon us, which means in 2 weeks on Saturday, December 16th. Is that in a week or 2 weeks? A week and a half or so. We're going to have 4 tracks, code labs. It's only $19, basically just to cover our costs for food. It's going to be at Google in Sunnyvale, probably about 400 people or so, but we'll have some really, really, really amazing talks. So since I'm co-organizing, it's very front-end heavy as well. But Ben will be talking there. One of our friends, Shirley, will be talking about data viz. We have a lot of people from Google talking about AppScript or Lighthouse or different things like that. So really interesting talks. Check that out. I think we only have 50 tickets left, so you definitely want to buy it as soon as possible as well. And then also we have Stephen here, who is going to just give us a quick state of Angular update to check out what's happening in Angular. So I'll pass it off to Stephen. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Tracy. This is such an awesome crowd tonight. Thank you guys all so much for coming. So my name is Stephen Fluin. I'm a developer advocate on the Angular team here at Google. So we've had a ton of really cool announcements since the last Angular Mountain View meetup. So I'm only going to touch on a few of them because I only have 5 minutes and not the usual 7 hours. Since we last met, the Angular team participated in a really cool conference called Angular Mix. Did anyone watch any of the videos? They are all online. So from the first day, a lot of really cool content from great individuals in the community, great speakers from the Angular team. And then we have the same thing from Angular Connect in London. Did anyone watch Angular Connect in London? Was anyone there? Those 3. You might see some of them on the videos. One of the things that we do is when we attend an event as the Angular team, we always try and ask for them to do things like live streaming the videos and recording them. So we do want that to be a really important asset for everyone in the community. So definitely take a look at the videos. And if you have any questions, if you have any options, people like me, people like our GDE community, we're always here to help answer questions, share our excitement for this kind of world that's going on. So that's some of the places that the Angular team has been. But we've also been working on some code, which is a good thing, right? We all want new features and new capabilities. So the biggest announcement was version 5. We did a preview of version 5 at the last Angular Mountain View meetup, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But the community response so far for V5 has actually been really positive in terms of, hey, we built a new version of the Angular platform that didn't break you, right? You just do an NPM update. It basically works. This is good, right? We said we were going to do it. We've done it twice now, and we're going to keep celebrating that, and we're going to keep doing that for you. This is kind of the vision coming to fruition in a lot of ways that we're very happy about, where you write Angular code, you build Angular applications, and we're going to keep making the platform better and better. We're going to build better tooling, and we're going to try and find ways to make your applications better without you having to change a single line of code, whether that's file size, whether that's taking your code and putting it in new places with projects like Angular Elements. So this is kind of something that the whole Angular community gets to look forward to and something we're really excited about. We also did another code drop, so about a month after 5.0 released, per kind of our established schedule. We just released 5.1 today. How many people saw the 5.1 announcement? Well, then, good news, everyone. 5.1 just dropped. So one of the nice things about this release is that we actually synced it up with a few different releases from the sub-projects. So historically, they all kind of had their own release schedules, and we're starting to kind of group them a little bit more so that you know what to expect, so all these things kind of come together. So as part of the 5.1 release, we had obviously a bunch of bug fixes, a bunch of improvements, all backward compatible because we're following our semantic versioning. So 5.1 is completely compatible with 5.0. But we also had a release of Angular Material, and that was a really big one. So that was the first stable release of Angular Material. Woohoo! So Angular Material, for those of you who don't know, is the basically the Google material design philosophy manifested it as a set of components that make it easy to build applications and take advantage of some really great visuals out of the box very quickly as a developer. It's actually been very, very high quality for a long time. I mean, I've been using it for more than a year in all of my projects across the board. Very high quality, very high stability. But the team didn't want to add the stable moniker, the stable label, until they were sure they weren't going to be making any more API changes. So now we've hit this level of stability. What we've said is that Angular Material is going to be following the same major release cycle. It'll have different patches, different minors. But in terms of major releases, 5x of Angular is going to work with 5x of Angular Material so that you know what to expect. Another big release that we had was CLI version 1.6. So, woo, thank you, Hans. Almost every Angular developer that I talk to loves the CLI in terms of the way that it automates away a lot of the kind of headaches and challenges with having to both understand and overcome a lot of the challenges in bundling. Igor actually gave a talk a couple months ago over in Europe about all of the challenges that we're trying to overcome in terms of tree shaking, in terms of kind of bundle optimization, because the state of the art in terms of how we take our code and ship it to browsers, it's really in flux, right? There's a lot of really cool ideas floating around, and we want to try and take advantage of those. And the CLI is our best way to take our knowledge of Angular, take our knowledge of how we build applications, and then automate away all of those little hiccups and challenges for you. So one of the biggest things to announce as part of the 1.6 release of the CLI is we now have service worker support. So we had this before, but the new one is much, much better. The big summary that I would say there is that the new service worker is really rebuilt from the ground up in order to make it easier on developers' lives. So with service worker support, it was very much like Workbox, which is a great Google product for building PWAs and building service workers into your application. But one of the things that we've done in our new service worker is we've done things like built our own life cycle for service workers. And you might think, oh, that sounds crazy. Why would you build your own life cycle for this kind of standard web technology? But service workers by default kind of break some developer expectations, right? So I write my code, I build my application, I load it up in the browser, and I hit refresh. And what do I expect to happen? I expect my app to reload. If you build a service worker by default, it's not going to reload, right? It's going to reload the cache in the background, and then I need the service worker to update itself before I can actually see the new version of the application. So we made some changes. We did a bunch of work to make this really good for developers. So in Angular, what will happen is on the first refresh, we'll load that new version of the application. And then even if you have that service worker loaded in a bunch of other tabs, we're still going to give you the new version on that second refresh. So hopefully everyone's able to take advantage of this now that the CLI supports it, both for creating new projects and for adding it to existing projects. We feel like service workers are ready to go, and we're really excited about that. We also released support for something called App Shell. So a lot of us ship kind of these static index.html files that we wrote once or ngnude once, and that we use as part of every application that we have. Now with App Shell, we actually have a bunch of tools that help you customize that App Shell. So as part of your build process, you can get something a little bit more interactive as part of your index.html file. Do you want to say anything else about that? Oh, that's great. And the last piece that we added in 1.6, in terms of the major changes, always the CLI is getting better with every release, is more universal support. So previously we had support for building a universal application or a server-side rendered Angular application via the CLI. And we just improved that by adding flags that allow you to build a new application with universal support or add universal support to another application. Lots of other really great things in 5.1. We have a blog post on blog.angular.io, things like new error messages, other cool things. Definitely take a look. It should be a drop-in replacement. If it's not, let us know because we consider that a bug. I think I've gone way past my 5 minutes, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Oh, I love Modern Web because I get to see all my friends and make new friends. And so just a raise of hands, how many of you guys are not from the Bay Area who are here? Hi, Sam. Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. Welcome. Yeah, we have the native script team here as well. At least 2 of you guys. So they'll be doing JavaScript Jeopardy with us. Yes, there are. Okay, so moving on, today we have some really awesome speakers. We just had Stephen, of course, just talk about the state of Angular for us. John Kuperman is going to be talking about PWAs and performance. Deborah Kurata is going to be speaking about Angular's router. And then Eric Simons is going to be talking about the new Angular IDE. Very, very exciting. This is going to be our schedule today. So we're going to have John first coming up. Then we'll have Deborah talking about the router. Then we will move on to native script Jeopardy. So I hope you guys are prepared. And then we will have Eric talking about StackBlitz for the panel as well. So save your questions till the very end, and then we'll get 3 or 4 of the guys over here to talk about the JavaScript, all the JavaScript things. Anyways, without further ado, I wanted to go ahead and invite John up here. So let's go ahead and give John a big round of applause. Thank you so much for coming all the way down from SF.
Awesome. All right. Yeah, I'm talking about progressive web apps and kind of specifically like a little bit of a nod at the Lighthouse scores, which are 0 to 100, like how to get 100 for your app. Not that that really should be the goal necessarily, but oh yeah. Hi, I'm John. Yes, as Tracy said, I work at Adobe, just started there recently doing a bunch of cool JavaScript stuff. Before that, I worked on, I'm not sure if anybody ever heard of the Brave web browser. No, okay. And I worked at Twitter before that. I really like doing JavaScript stuff, web performance, all those things. So, and then progressive web apps in general have become like something that I've been just really excited about. Not something that I do a lot of in my full-time job because we don't have a ton of web apps right now, but something that I think is like really, really cool, all these up and coming technologies. So what is a PWA? It is nonsense made up by Google, right? It is, it's true. It's not a real thing. That's like a question I get a lot, like, oh, is mine a PWA or is it not a PWA? I guess the best thing, so it stands for Progressive Web App. And so it's a web app that progressively can be more than a web app, which is pretty cool. But there's not necessarily like a full, like you're in, you're not in situation here. There's these cool graphs that I saw when I searched for what is a PWA. So this one, there's pairs, and the pair is there whether you're online or not. So I think that's kind of an important thing about progressive web apps is they present some kind of offline experience. But so we'll get into a lot of like the cool stuff they can do more than what you need to do with them because it's really up to your application specific needs. So like I said, they can do offline stuff. It's an app, it's not a website. So if you hit the app, you should never see that amazing Chrome dinosaur. You should actually see something, even if it's just a static page. They're able to be saved to your home screen. So they should be able to turn into just a little app icon on your home screen that you can use just like any other native app that you have. They can do push notifications. So again, like they should be able to have all the functionality that a native phone app has. So you get push notifications, you click it, it opens up that icon on your home screen. They should be able to interact with all the things that users are used to interacting with. So if you have something and I click that I want to share it, I should see the native share screen, not a little web screen. Similarly, if I want to go buy something, I should be able to, use these things and use the native Android or iOS, whatever you use, payments API. So these are these like really cool things that you can start doing. And I think that that historically there was a big technical difference between what apps could do and what websites can do. And so what PWAs are all about is just bridging that gap, right? Is like getting to the point where like there's a lot of things that most of the things that people need can be done via these web APIs. They can do really cool new stuff like face detection. I don't know who this guy is. He's awesome. But there's like some amazing APIs that are coming out. These are like built in, like I think like they're in development right now in Chrome, but like these like facial recognition. So you can make games, you can do QR scanners, things like that. all with native web APIs. So kind of begs the question, like, why should you build one? And I think this comes up a lot. Like, everybody works for different companies that are in different places, right? Like, some of you may have like web only, some of you make products, and your native apps are really what drive a lot of your business. Like, people are, you know, coming at it from all different areas. And I kind of have one main point, which I'll get to, of why I think you should build one. But before I get into that, there's this like there's been some really great talks by Googlers about the web and web versus native and all these things. And there's this like 2 slides that I really love in conjunction with each other. So the first one is here, right? And it's about time spent between mobile websites and time spent on native mobile apps, right? And so you can see, like, this is discouraging for us here tonight. Yes, it's like, well, why would I mess around with the mobile web? That's stupid. And then the next one that I thought was like so interesting is that the problem is that 80% of that big number is spent in the user's top 3 apps, right? I mean, so this is not everybody gets an equal cut of the pie, make as many iOS apps as you can because that's where people spend time. The problem is that apps have become culturally regarded very differently from websites, where you have like what deserves to be on my home screen, or what ones am I going to really go to and open, and what ones am I going to give all these wild permissions to, all these things like that. And like, users do not spend time on a large variety of different apps, really. So if you're Facebook, if you're Twitter, you know, like, and you're in one of these like top 10 apps or whatever, like, I would still argue there's a huge need, which I'll get to, for progressive web apps, but maybe you can rest a little bit easier in this space. But I think like a lot of us, especially those of us that work for startups, know like emerging into that mobile app market is so difficult, so hard starting off. And I think PWAs give like a really, really great way to enter. Another reason is just the sheer size of the web platform. This is something I feel like that gets like missed a lot, not talked about a lot, is just like, if you view the web as a platform as you would like, you know, Mac OS or iOS or anything like that, like, it's the biggest one. It's huge. It has like a super low barrier to entry. You know, people from all over the world using it. You know, it's really mature in a lot of ways. I know we all joke about how immature the really front-facing thing is with our framework churn and things like that. But as far as like a lot of these like these protocols and things like that, it's really mature. And so like this is another one I saw from Google, is like, this is just their Chrome iOS users, right? So they have 1 billion monthly Chrome users. Like, it'd be pretty cool to work on an app that had 1 billion monthly users. That's a significant percent of the world population. So it's all this big market that you can capture. And then some really cool things. Like, I think for as long as we've been engineering, like doing coding, we've like always gone after this like write once, run anywhere. I think it was like Flash's motto way back in the day. You know, we've always wanted this thing, right, where like we build an app and then we just ship it to wherever you are, whether it's a website or a mobile app or something like that. But with progressive web apps, and we've seen things in the past, right? We've seen like people familiar with like PhoneGap or Cordova, or, you know, these things where like you kind of write a website and then you compile it into this thing and it ships as an app, but it's got a little web frame, you know, all this stuff. But progressive web apps are really, really just this. It's just a website, right? And we've seen some really cool support with the PWA format being allowed in things like the Windows Store and soon on Chrome OS. And so like the same app that you write, that's your website, that people can pin to their mobile devices, they also will, in some cases, or will soon in others, be able to start downloading them on desktop apps as well, desktop devices as well. This is just an article from the Windows Store that like, so it's really cool. So if you have a valid progressive web app, it will be searchable through the Windows Store. It'll show up in Bing and it'll be installable as an app in their Windows Store, which I'm sure really helps their numbers. But it's great for everybody. And then the last thing is the emerging markets. Like, I think like for those of us that have worked in companies that try to reach out into emerging markets, like we've seen such real struggles between like lack of bandwidth, lack of reliable connection, all these different things. Like, you know, working on Twitter, just fought so much of this where it's like, if your app's too big, people just can't download it. Or like in a lot of areas, like if you're in China and you're not allowed access to certain things. So like people come up with these really creative ways of like they're sharing apps around on like USB sticks and installing them and different things like that. Like they're prohibitive. Like, and a lot of people don't even have an up-to-date phone OS. And this is like where the web really shines, right? Like all of these devices, no matter how old the devices are, they have a web browser on them. They can hit these websites. And so you start seeing like this last year, like some really cool stories of like Uber, in an effort to get into these markets, made this really, really high performance progressive web app. It loads super fast. It's way tinier than their mobile app, their iOS app, and they're seeing this huge growth. And like Twitter did the same thing like 2 years ago or a year ago. They made a really high performance mobile web app because they've forever struggled to get into these emerging markets. This is kind of the first time they're getting this real penetration there. And then there's this really cool site. I have a link to it at the end, PWA stats, like just people sharing cool stories like, oh, we made our mobile web app better and we're starting to see, this growth or that growth or whatever. But I did kind of like this, like that it's not just about a good enough experience. Like companies are driving real customer acquisition with these things. These are not like, I think, there's still a lot of mobile websites, even the ones that are really good. Like I love Reddit's mobile website, but you hit it and like the whole bottom half of the thing is like, you deserve the best, get our mobile app. It's like always like what happens. Like, but this is like cool. It's like, this isn't like a second-class citizen. This is like really what they're using to drive new customers. Okay, so here's like the meat of my talk, right? This is the point, is that I think a lot of the reason that it's so difficult in this current mobile app market is because it's like, it's this really stark, you get this one shot, right? Like the Eminem song. And so you have your app and however you funnel your user to the app store, right? And they're in front of your thing and they get like, you get the reviews and the description, a list of permissions, a little picture, that's what you get. And the user has to make a decision, yes or no, right there. Like I'm gonna download this app, it's gonna make its way to my home screen, or I'm not gonna download this app, and you don't get anything else, right? And here is where progressive web apps, the progressive part really shines, because these aren't just websites that are the same way, where you hit twitter.com and it's like, hey, we need your GPS and we need push notification. It's not like that. You get a lot more control about when you ask for permissions and what permissions you ask for. And it gives you a shot to gain the user's trust, right? Where you're like, hey, you just got here, like, nothing, no pop-ups, nothing for you, just please enjoy. And then it's like, oh, you've been back a few times, would you like to add me to your home screen? Or like, oh, I see that you always go right to notifications, would you like to enable push notifications? All these different things. So it really gives you this shot to like prove yourself to your user, to your customer. And I think that can be like probably the biggest win that you can get there, right? Is like you get this opportunity to show the user your thing of value, to get them excited or whatever. And you really can choose specifically when and how you approach your user about a more long-term relationship with your product. And I think that's like the biggest win for PWAs. So here's this like cool GIF. It's just like, they got a push notification, they click it, it goes to this Twitter mobile app that looks like a native app. It has the URL bar in it, and they're checking it out. I'll let it cycle through again. But they're on the page for a little while. So, right, like, here, they're going to the app right now on their home screen. Let's wait till it restarts. But basically what I just kind of wanted to show you is how Twitter is like really poignant with when they approach a new user about asking for permission. So you're on your thing, a push notification comes just like native. You click it, you open it up. It's not like, hey, add me. It doesn't say that. It lets you interact with this thing. When you click through to a second tweet, this pops up and it's like, hey, like you seem to be enjoying. And this might even be too aggressive. I'm sure they A/B tested it, but they get to really control to be like, looks like you're having fun interacting with our app. Would you like to, take this next step or whatever? I think that's really powerful. Okay, cool. So moving into the 100 point and back to Google stuff. This is like just a Google talk, whatever. There's a really cool tool from Google called Lighthouse. Who's used Lighthouse before? It's cool, about half of the people. It's really great. So for anybody that in the past had used like the audits tab of Chrome DevTools to do like, or page speed insights, things like that, this is like the new replacement for that. And so this is their awesome logo. They have a cool logo. Okay, so basically this is like a Lighthouse audit, right? And so it has these 4 categories. So it's like the progressive web app is its own category. We'll get into that. Web performance is a big one. Accessibility is a big one, and then just best practices. And so you get these kind of 4 scores, 0 to 100, across things like that. And then more than that, you can dive into these, and you can start seeing like, oh, like why did I get a 90? Why did I, so it's like a really in-depth page audit, basically. Lighthouse is really cool. So like at Adobe, we use it as part of our CI, which is really great. So like every time we spin up a new build, we run Lighthouse on it, and we gate merges based on Lighthouse scores, right? So we're like, oh, we're in like we're at a 78 performance wise, like we won't drop below a 75, right? So if you make a commit, that would lower us. So we use it that way. They also can be like downloaded, exported. You can use, there's like really cool apps, like I didn't put a link in here, but Calibre, I don't know how to say it, Calibre app.com is a really cool one where it just takes snapshots with Lighthouse and web page test over time, and you can see this like historical data about how fast your site is, things like that. So it shows all this really cool stuff. So let's get into some specific examples, like a more technical side of progressive web apps and all the neat stuff they can do and how easy it is to get set up. So the first one, like I think the kind of two things that come to mind, I think, for a lot of people are add to home screen and offline. So those are the ones we're going to tackle first. So to add to home screen, this is very reminiscent of, what was that thing that Google had before? It's like apps, app cache, app. No, they had an app manifest before. But anyway, so you get this manifest file, right? It's just a file that you put at the root of your website. And you can just fill out a few different things, like its name, what icon it's going to have, a start URL, background color, just some of the stuff that basic apps need, right? The same stuff you'd see in a native iOS or Android app. There's just one little part that I think is really powerful that for the manifest is there's like this display property. I think this is like a big one that I see people miss or not know about, which is like you choose when, so say somebody saves your app to the home screen and they open it from the home screen. In what way does it open? How does it display itself? So like, does it display itself as a website with, with a Chrome bar across the top or whatever? Does it display itself as a full standalone app taking up 100% of the screen real estate? Does it have like this minimal UI they offer? And you can even do things like you can lock it into portrait or landscape mode. So I just wanted to point out that you really have that full flexibility there too. And then after you generate this file and you have it, there's a really cool site. Bad with the resources on this one, but there's a site that'll automatically generate web manifests from your website, but they're pretty simple to make. You just need the icon and the name, basically. Then you just link to it with this link rel equals manifest, and boom, there your app is good enough to be saved on a home page. So you'll get this little add to home screen. That's what it looks like. Next one, offline mode. So you mentioned Workbox earlier, which I think is really cool. So basically offline mode and like, I think service workers are a pretty complicated concept. Like they're a good buzzword. A lot of people have heard of them. A lot of sites still aren't using them. Workbox is this really neat thing where basically it generates your service worker for you. And it gives you like more than that. Like service workers need to know like specifically what files to cache, right? Which can be really difficult. So they integrate with your build system. So if you use like Webpack or Gulp or whatever, you can run it through Webpack. Webpack knows all the files it's generating. It adds those to the list of ones to cache. It's really nice. The only kind of problem right now, which is getting fixed really soon, is that Workbox is a little on the big side, but I think that they have like a 3.0 version coming very soon. Anyway, so Workbox is really cool. It generates these for you. Other than that, you can just go ahead and write service workers yourself. They're just JavaScript files, and we'll go over one in a minute. And the cool thing about when you have these service workers, though, is like you can do all this stuff, but it's a little bit overwhelming, right? You have all these options for like what you cache and how long you cache it for, and even we're talking about with this like Angular, it's like, oh, like it'd be really cool if you didn't. When you refresh, you could actually start seeing some of the new content because your caching strategy for users with intermittent connections is very different from developers trying to like make a cool new update or things like that. So you get a lot of different options, and basically all the options revolve around like the concept of what you cache, what and when you grab updates, right? And then the concept here is that you can grab an update but not display it, right? So like a lot of people, when I hit the site, I'll get the cached version. And then it'll go and it'll fetch all the new versions, right? And then it's like, okay, well, how and when do you show the user the new version, right? So there's all these different like ideas. Like one of them is like, as soon as the new version comes in, you give a little bit of DOM, like a button shows up or something. It's like, hey, we've got a newer version. Would you like to refresh? Like another one is that they just keep doing this dance where it's like you always see like one older, well, the cached version, right? Like if it's different, you'll see it on the next refresh. So these get really complicated to set up. And one of the things that I really like about Workbox is it comes with this like this strategy, right? It's got these like 4 different pre-built strategies. You can read through their little descriptions and be like, that's the one I want. Like I want cache and then refresh or cache only, different things like that. And it makes this service worker generation really nice. So basically, if you're going to make your own service worker, you need 2 things. Like one, you just need to just safely check to make sure that the web browser supports service workers. And then if it does, you just need to register it. And that can be any file name, whatever you make. And so then the other side of that is the file. So, okay, I was like, service workers are so great. You could fit a really robust one on one slide. And then I think I took it too far because that's pretty tiny. But it does fit on one slide. I guess technically anything fits on one side. So basically, like what you have here is like we were talking earlier about like cache invalidation. So you need like some kind of versioning, right? Like some way for your app to know like a number system. So you could like this one, it's like pre-cache version 1, and then your next one could be pre-cache version 2 or version 1.1, right? Some way of like the server being like, here's the newest stuff, and your server worker being like, do I have that or do I have something older? And then you get these list of URLs. This is what Workbox can help with. Instead of like having to generate each URL, you can run it through your build system. So whatever your build system outputs, that's what it'll cache. And then you basically have a few different things. Like some of the meat of it is like this first little function up here is the install hook. So basically it's like whenever the service worker gets registered, gets installed, it does its caching. Then there's an activate hook. The activate hook is just how you like deal with old stuff, deal with cleanup, deal with removing the old, purging your old caches basically. And then there's this like fetch handler. So it's an event listener on fetch. That's what does the meat of the like, that's where you choose your cache strategy, right? So it's like when the user goes to fetch a new thing, what do you do? Like, so for this one, you check this array of cached files that you have. And if it's in there, then you serve that. If it's not in there, you go on with the fetch. But that's where it's up to your application logic, like to be like, what do we do when a fetch comes in? That's a big slide. Sorry about that. So here's like a cool one. Have anybody seen this site, Pokedex.org? This came out like a few years ago as like, it was like, this is what mobile web apps can be. I'm sure they can be way cooler now, but I like Pokemon a lot. So basically what I just wanted to like point out here is that you can see me in Chrome DevTools set the mode to offline and then come back and interact with the app the exact same way, even through refreshes. This is gonna be really cool. I got into a really good conversation earlier about like your offline strategy. Like it gets a lot more into like specific application logic. Like what do you serve? Like if you're a news site, maybe you just serve some old articles, or if you're Twitter, you just serve the timeline as it was the last time they were there. Other sites can choose to serve different things. Push notifications, also really simple. They have this, it's the notification API. So you request permission, which is what the thing that puts the pop-up down. Again, back to my main point, you're in full control here of like when you ask for permission. So it doesn't have to be on page load. It can be like when the user clicks the notifications tab. And then you get back whether they gave you permission or not. And then if they give permission, you just do this show notification. You can put anything you want there. You can put images in there. You get the full gamut of like, a robust push notification. Okay, last part of my talk is performance. Because like, honestly, like I said, progressive web apps, they're not necessarily one thing, and adding like a service worker and all that isn't going to make your website suddenly a great, enjoyable experience for people in developing nations on slow connections, right? So like ultimately, this still comes back to the core issue of like your websites are too slow, and my websites are too slow too. Don't be mad. Maybe your websites are really fast, but websites are too slow. They're too big. They take too long, and I think a lot of times we build them for really high-end devices, really high-end network conditions, and that's just not the case for a lot of people. Adi Asmani has this really cool talk about JavaScript startup performance. It's interesting because I think for years we've heard about performance as in like the size of the bundle over the wire, right? Which is really important. And we'll talk about that in a second. But even things like what I really liked about this post was like even things like parse time. Regardless of how long it takes that network connection, like how long does it take Chrome to parse that huge blob? And so he has like this interesting thing. This is like parsing a meg of JavaScript. And you can just see that like some of these older devices take like, almost to a full second just to parse through that. So that's not network time. It still has to go all the way down the network, right? That's just like actually like parsing through. And then just in general, like seeing this trend of like parse times on mobile. So these are even with high-end devices are 36% higher than on desktop. So like when we're talking about performance, like we're not only talking about size, but we're talking about just the complexity of parsing through your application. So bundle size is an easier one to hit, but is still very challenging. So there's always this low-hanging fruit. Like I do a few web performance talks, and I'm always like, the basics to have covered are like, make sure that everything that can be compressed is compressed, right? You can gzip, or depending on the browsers that you have to support, you can use Brotli now, or however you say it. Make sure everything is compressed by something so it's smaller going over the wire. Take all those images, static images especially, and losslessly compress them so that like removes all the metadata and crap that you don't need. And then combine assets where possible, right? This is stuff we've been pitching for years and years. Like make image sprites or bundle all your JavaScript or your CSS. Like, so do this first because this will really help get your score up. But then at a certain point, like you're like, okay, I'm doing all those things. I still have too much code, right? Like, and that's a real problem. And so like a lot of us use bundlers. I spent a lot of time struggling over what examples I was going to go with. I just decided to go with Webpack, not picking any favorites here. There's great bundlers everywhere. So like, how many people have some sort of build process for their front end app? Like it could be NPM scripts, like, right? Like it's almost, it could be yours. I'm sorry. Should have called ahead. So yeah, anyway, so we all do it, right? We have these complex apps and we have these dependencies. We're not making stuff that's 100% authored by us. We're pulling stuff in. We got to get it together, all this stuff, right? So this is great. Webpack or whatever you use like can really help make that happen for you. But it has a bunch of problems too that aren't Webpack problems. They're just problems with what we're really doing, right? Which is we're just pulling a tremendous amount of code in, not really caring too much about the specifics and then just sending it down to the user. You know, we pipe it through Webpack and hope for the best, right? And like, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So there's some really cool tools. Like if you use Webpack, I really recommend Webpack Bundle Analyzer, but basically you just install it as a plugin, you run it through once, and it gives you this really great graph of like how big your bundle is, how big it is gzipped, how big it is parsed. And what's in there. And like, I can't tell you how many times, even on like really high-end projects that I've worked on, I've ran Webpack Bundle Analyzer and been like, what is that thing doing in there? Like Lodash, like, and I love Lodash, and this exposes just a problem with how we use Webpack. But like how many times I'll just see I'm like, who's installing this library? You know, I'll trace it down and be like, oh man, I just needed the date and I got all this stuff with it or whatever. Like, so I think it's like really cool to just be able to see, just at least to be conscious of like what's going in there, right? And so like there's some plugins for Webpack that can help things out a lot. The first and the third one, so Common Chunks plugin is like, basically you can do things like look at how many packages are required by multiple things. You can kind of break them into like a vendor package, right? So you're basically sending down 2 bits of JavaScript now, like your app and the bundle, so that helps. Module concatenation plugin, this is like, I don't know how many people have used Rollup, but Rollup takes like this different approach to Webpack. And this kind of makes Webpack work more like Rollup, right? Where instead of like wrapping each bit of code in its own function, it just kind of like hoists a bunch of stuff to the top, so it can be a little faster. But the big one and the misconception I hear, so this is Uglify.js, and it's not about Uglify.js. It's about the fact that the concept of tree shaking, right? And so like, I have this little slide here. Sorry if it's hard to read, but basically this is from the Webpack docs. So you have a file, right? And it has square and cube, just 2 functions. Like that's what it does, right? And let's say you put it out as an NPM package and you're like, oh, there's some math, you know, whatever. And then I go to use it and I'm like, cool. And I do everything right? And it's like import cube from math. That's what I want, just the cube function, right? Good, right? No, because like the way that Webpack works, the way a lot of these bundlers work is like, you know, when you require something even from a file, like it imports that entire file, right? So you're getting, what's the other one called? Square, even though you're not using Square anywhere. And this is, I mean, this is a trivial example, but like this is why Lodash shows up, because people are importing it. Lodash is really set up to tree shake nicely, but if you import it this way, you're just going to get the entire thing. And that happens over and over again. You get this big blob. And so Uglify.js, one of the things that it does is it allows you to tree shake, which means that your builds take a lot longer, but your bundle size is a lot smaller because it'll go through and see what's used and what's not used. A lot of these cool ones, these like new ones that came out this week, there's like 2 bundlers this week. They do the tree shaking for you, which is like pretty nice, but just something to be conscious of when you're looking through the Webpack analyzer, right? Like to be like, why is this in here? And be like, oh, I bet you I'm not tree shaking out. Dead code elimination, I think is what Clojure compiler calls it. Same kind of concept. Okay, cool. So getting to the end here. PWA checklist, if you want to call yourself or your app a PWA, there are a few requirements, right? So like all the requests have to happen over HTTPS. This gets into all the really cool stuff you can do and the permissions that needs, right? So if you're going to have like the camera access and facial recognition, all that payments, all that cool stuff, it's got to be HTTPS. It has to have a mobile-friendly layout, but then it has to be fast, right? And I'm not talking about fast here in Mountain View or wherever we are. We're talking about like fast on a 3G connection, right? So use like a simulator, emulator, whatever. It has to have something offline, right? It can't just be the browser, no network. You have to have some strategy, even if it's just a static file. And you have to have that manifest, a valid manifest, so it can be added to the home screen. So if you just do these things, you have a PWA. But there's a bunch of other really cool tech to play with. Cool. I didn't have as many resources as I meant to, but there's like the Google official page here. PWAstats.com is really cool. And then you can also check the service worker status with this, is service worker ready? Because it doesn't have full browser support right now. It doesn't have full support in IE and Edge. That being said, they're very much ready for people to start sending these things to production because they're progressive. They don't cause errors. They all fall back. If it doesn't support it, no problem there. Cool. I don't have a thank you slide, but thank you.
Awesome. That was really lovely. So next up, we have Deborah. So how many of you guys know Deborah? Basically, lots of people in the room. Well, Deborah has been in the Angular community. She's one of my fellow Google developer experts for Angular and web technologies. Also a Microsoft MVP, done really, really amazing things. I think you're also on the Angular docs team, right? What? Yeah. So previously on the Angular 2 docs team as well, helping us get those amazing docs that we refer to all the time. And she's going to be talking about and things you didn't know about Angular's router. So let's go ahead and give Deborah a big round of applause. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No, probably want to start at the beginning. Yeah. Good evening. It's good to see you all. All right, so I'm going to talk about the router this evening. As Tracy said, my name is Deborah Kurata. I'm a software developer. I'm also a Pluralsight author, so I brought some free 1-month trials for Pluralsight if you're interested in that. The best way to reach out to me is on Twitter at Deborah Kurata. So I have one slide that covers how routing works to ensure we're all on the same page with regard to our terminology. And then we're going to look at a bunch of things that might not be common knowledge about how the router works. So how many of you have used the router in Angular? Just about everybody. Okay, cool. So most of you know how routing works. So just one slide. So how does routing work? Well, we frequently have some kind of menu or toolbar that we have that allows the user to navigate through our application. Behind that navigation bar or toolbar or menu, we're going to have something with a router link in it, and the router link is what activates our routes. So the user clicks on movie list, it says, oh, I want to go to the movies route. It sticks it on the URL. The router kicks in and goes, oh, the address bar has changed, so I am going to go look through my configured routes. And it looks through the list of all of the configured routes, finds the first match, not the best match, but the first match, and then selects it, determines what component needs to be loaded, ensures that that component is loaded, finds the template information that it's supposed to be showing, looks for a router outlet, and that's where it puts it. So that's where our routed component ends up. So our key points here is that we have the router link to activate the routes, the list of route configuration paths, and our router outlet where all of these things will actually appear in the user interface. So are we good with that? Because that's all the intro that we're doing. Okay. All right. So the first tip is to menu or not to menu. Sometimes we need our user interface pieces to appear with our menu on them. Other times, like for a login, we want it to appear without a menu. So what is an easy way to actually make this work? Well, here might be some code that we would have to actually show our app components, our menu. It's an appcomponent.html, and so we have our menu there with our router link, and we have our container with our router outlet, and that's where that's going to appear then, obviously, underneath our menu. So what we end up with is an app, our app components router outlet is going to be underneath our menu, and that's where everything's going to show up. So what can we do about it? Well, we could stick an ngIf on it, right? That's the most obvious thing, stick an ngIf, but then every single one of your components needs to know about this property that you need to set to turn on and off the menu. You could be introducing bugs. There are all sorts of issues with doing that. So is there another approach? The other way you could do it is simply to use a router outlet in your app component HTML. Don't put a menu or anything else in there at all. Just have it the empty router outlet. If you do that, you still need a menu somewhere, so you could create a second component. So here, at this point, then our app component, its router outlet is the entire display area of the browser. But we still need our menu somewhere, so we're going to put it in another component. I happen to call it shell component. Might not be the best name to be confused with PWAs shell, but anyway, it's our little component that has our menu bar and such. And so we have, we have our router links there and our router outlet. So this is our second level router outlet. So we now have 2 router outlets in our application. And to simplify this further, we can take all of the menu code and actually put it in its own little component. So we would have a separate component that would be easy to find and edit as people add additional menu options to the application. So our shell component then has the menu and it has its own child router outlet. So what we end up with is our app component has the router outlet, that's the whole screen, and we can navigate then any of our routes to that router outlet, so it will appear with no menu on it. Alternatively, we could route our shell component to it and then use its router outlet, its shell router outlet, and route stuff into there. Then it will appear with the menu. So that's our router configuration here in our app routing module. So this is the actual code to display our routes. So our route, our standard default route paths here are the ones that are going to be routed into our basic app components router outlet. The key here is this children. By specifying the children property, the paths defined underneath there are then routed to the shell component. So that's how we set up our multiple levels of router outlets using the children property. So that's how we have sometimes a menu and sometimes not. So it's a little bit better of a way than ngIf. So the next topic is data. We all need to pass data to our routes. So for example, we might have a movie list component and we want the user to be able to click on one of those and display a detail page. In order for it to know whose detail to display, we need to pass it the number of the one that we want it to display. So we can easily pass that as part of our route using a route parameter. But we also might have more complex options, like maybe an advanced search feature where the user could put in one or none or any of these options. And so we might have optional parameters. So how do we deal with more data than that? We wouldn't want to make them all required parameters. Luckily for us, Angular actually has 3 different kinds of parameters that it provides: required, optional, and query parameters. Now, whenever I am really on a tight deadline, and the one thing I need to do more than anything is really focus on the project I'm on or my deadline, the first thing I do is go to Stack Overflow and procrastinate, right? Isn't that the first thing that we all do? So I do spend time from time to time up on Stack Overflow. And if you look at any of their questions about routing, frequently what you'll find people have trouble with is they'll copy some part from some sample code that was for required parameters and another part for optional parameters and still another part for query parameters, put it all in one set of code and expect it all to work together. And it, of course, doesn't. So the moral of that story is whenever you need a parameter to pass between your components, you need to decide ahead of time whether you want required, optional, or query, and then use the correct code for that one technique because they're all different. So if you're configuring required parameters, then you want to make sure you add it to the configuration with the colon with the actual parameter ID on it. The router link and the navigate then are very similar here, and we pass in the parameters. Now you can have more than the one I showed here. You can separate any number of them with slashes, and then when you specify the values, you would just add them as additional elements in that array. We can just get it then with parammap.get. If you're going to do optional parameters, however, you do not put them on the route configuration, so they don't go there because they're optional. With the router link and the router navigate, then you pass a different second parameter where you specify all of the optional parameters with a key value pair object. The resulting URL then looks a little different. It's semicolon separated value, key and value pairs. You still use parammap to get the value. But if you want to use query parameters, then you use an entirely different directive on them, the query params. And then it looks more like a true query string with the question mark and the semicolon. But then to get it, you need query param map instead of param map to get the values. Now, the key difference between optional and query parameters, other than all of the syntactical differences, is that with query parameters, it can actually, you can tell it to remember those parameters across routes. So for example, on our advanced search example, you could have the user type in the values, pass those using query parameters to a list page, have the list page filter based on those, allow the user to return back to the advanced search, retain those parameters, and then reuse them as defaults when they come back here so it remembered their prior selections. So you can do those kinds of things with query parameters. It would be harder to do. It would be a manual process to do them with optional parameters. Okay, next, preventing partial page display. I'm sure we've run into the case where we've had a page that comes up with some information, and a little while later, the data actually appears. And actually, when we work on our Angular apps, this happens anytime we go get data, right? Because our data access is asynchronous. We say, hey, we want some data, and some future point in time, who knows when, it'll actually come back and give us our data. So during that point in time, we have issues with what to do with our pages here. So what do? We add ngIfs, we add the safe navigation operator. So we make it such that we can actually, not get errors while we're waiting for this data to come down. Well, the router gives us another option. We can actually make our asynchronous operation appear to our page, our routed page, as being synchronous. How do we perform that magic? It is with building a resolver. So we can build a resolver whose purpose is to perform an asynchronous operation, wait for that operation to resolve before actually navigating to the route. A resolver is basically a service. You see the injectable. We implement resolve, which is what makes it officially a resolver. And we can tell it that what the data is that we want that resolver to resolve. And yes, I'm really old-fashioned, and I use eyes on my interfaces. I always feel like I need therapy or something because I have eyes on my interfaces. But anyway, okay, so because I implemented the resolve method, or the resolve interface rather, I need a resolve method. In this particular example, I want to route to a detail page, so I'm pulling the ID out of my parameter, and I'm calling my movie service getMovie. Now notice that I don't subscribe here. The resolver is going to take care of that for me. It's going to automatically subscribe. It's going to cause the operation to occur, the async operation, the HTTP GET, and then it's going to wait for that data to come back before it routes to my page. Okay? Because this is a service, we have to add it as a provider in our providers for one of our modules. So there it is there. And we hook it to whichever route configuration we want it to use by way of part of the configuration information. So we would say resolve, we give it a name, and we tell it the name of the service, module resolver. When it then routes to that component, the component then itself doesn't need to go out and get the data again because the data already is there. So all it needs to do is talk to the route snapshot. So it can say this.route.snapshot.data.movie, where movie again was the name that we specified in our path there. Notice that this is in the ng on init. Okay, I can get this data the moment that I'm initializing my page. So that means I don't need ngIfs, I don't need safe navigation operators. When my page is displayed, I have my data. Make sense? Okay, so a good way to make your asynchronous data retrieval operation appear, at least from this page's point of view, as being synchronous, because it's going to be sitting there waiting for me as I display that page. All right. But somewhere it still has to wait, right? And where that waiting is going to be is on whatever page I'm on when I go make that request. So say, for example, I'm on this movie list page and I click on one of the options there, and now I'm going to wait for however long while the resolver goes up and it goes and gets the data and waits for it to return. So what are we going to want to do? We're going to want to put a spinner or something on the page. So what's an easy way to put a spinner on every single page without having to add it to every one of our components? Well, what we can do is in our app component, in our main app root component, we can actually subscribe to all of the router events. So router.events.subscribe, and then we can call some method. I called mine check router events. Here then in my check router events, I'm checking to see what the router event is. If it's navigation start, I'm turning some flag on. If it's end, cancel, or error, I'm turning the flag off. Then you remember our little app component HTML now that just had that router outlet. I add whatever visual I want. Here I'm just using the Bootstrap style classes. I cheaped out and just picked the spinner there. And I add my little ngIf with that loading flag on it. And again, that was the flag from here. So it's going to automatically turn on for every single time that I have a navigation start, and it'll turn off every single time on a navigation end, cancel, or error. Okay, so a really quick and easy, fast and simple way to get a spinner on the page. Okay, it was much harder actually to find the correct icon than it was to write all of that code. All right, so when you have problems with the router, how do you figure out what's going on? Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually see all of those events we just talked about? Oops, wrong way. Well, we actually can. We can actually get a dump of all of our routing events. And I know that's going to be kind of small and hard to see, but basically here's a dump of some of the router events I might have. Navigation start, routes recognized, guards state, guards check state, guards check end, resolve start, resolve end, navigation end. So how do we actually get all of these to show up? All we need to do is, oh, my box ended up weird here, but anyway. Oh, and that all came off up. I don't know what happened here, but my slide resized weird. That's supposed to be circling this part. The enabled tracing equals true. That's all we have to do there is add the enabled tracing equal true onto our for root for our router module, and that turns on our tracing. So at that point, we automatically start seeing gobs of stuff showing up in our console, telling us what's going on with our routing. Okay, guards at the ready. For some of our routes, we want to ensure that the user has logged in. And in other places, we may want to know when the user is leaving. So for example, maybe they're on an edit and they made a bunch of changes, and we want to let them know that, hey, you made some changes and you haven't saved, but now you're trying to navigate away. Do you really want to do that? Or we could even automatically save if they attempt to do something like that. So how do we set up these guards? How do we protect our routes from people who aren't supposed to be there, who need to be logged in? How do we ensure that they don't leave without saving? Well, what we can do is we can create guards, and we do those by building a guard service. So we add another service, and this is, again, using add injectable. This time we implement whatever guard that we want to use, and there are bunches of guards available, like can activate is what you would primarily use for an authorization guard of some kind. I selected to show can deactivate because it can do some kind of fun things here. I can use the generic parameter to tell it which component that I'm actually going to be using this guard with. When I do that, in the can deactivate method that I specify for the can deactivate interface, it will actually inject that component into me so that I can talk to it. So here my guard can actually talk to my component. So it can say, hey, has the user made some changes? Is it dirty? Hey, what is the title of the movie that you're currently editing? So it has access to all of that information. If I return true from the guard, it will go ahead and continue the routing process as it normally would. If I return false, it cancels the routing process at that point, and it will return to where it was. Again, because this is a service, I register it with one of the modules, and I add it to a route. So I specify which route that I want this to work on. So here's my edit route. I'm using that same resolver that I was using in my detail route, specifying movie resolver. So when they come in to edit, again, I'm getting the data before they see the page. Can deactivate, then it will ensure that they don't leave with unsafe changes. So that's how you guard your routes. Keeping tabs. Most sample applications that we see, or most demo little applications, have a handful of fields, right? And we go back to the office and suddenly we have 100 fields and we're like, how are we going to fit all of those on the screen? So frequently the answer is we create tabs, right? So here we've got a basic information tab and a search tags tab, and in a real app, we might have 5 or 6 tabs or more. And there are lots of different ways that you can implement that, but one way is with routing, because we're talking about routing today. All right, so in order to do that, one way is that, again, we have our app components router outlet, remember that? We have our shell components router outlet. What we can do is define yet another nested level of router outlets. And then we can define each component or each tab's information as a separate component. And we can navigate then as they select the tabs. So we can navigate to whichever tab's component makes sense for that tab. That's making sense? Yeah, okay. All right, so we can have any number of levels of nested router outlets going on. So what does this look like? Well, this is what our app routing module looked like before, with our welcome and our movies ID. And when we want to add this edit functionality, it would look just like this. So we would add the movies :ID/edit as one of the child of the shell component, because that's where we want the parent to appear. And then we again add children and add its paths for all the tabs. And again, I only have 2 tabs, but you could have any number of tabs. Is that making sense? Okay, so that's the bit of code I just added here. So this is what the edit component HTML would look like. So this again has the tabs, and I'm using just a little style class to make those tabs look nice. And then it's 3rd level router outlet. And that lets us route then into that area of the page. Okay, so kind of an interesting way to attack tabs. All right, the problem is, however, that in a real application, we most likely don't want all of our movie routes here in our app routing module, right? We're going to want a movie module, and we're going to want to move all those routes into that movie module, right? Because we want to modularize our application so it bundles nice and we get all the nice, faster display of our first page as it comes up. So if I just pulled these paths out and moved them into their own movie module and pulled off the movies off of the front of everyone, what would happen here? Where would my movie detail component, for example, where would it show up if I only did this? It would show up in my app components router outlet, because it has no idea that it's supposed to be a child of the shell component, right? Because it's just going to merge these routes together and it's not going to know. So how do I tell it that I want these to be a child of the shell components paths, routes? I use load children. So here I can specify my movies, load children, movie module. So I'm telling it to load the children for movies from the movie module. And then it knows to keep that as children of the shell component. Is that making sense? Okay, the downside is this syntax doesn't work. So Brad's here, you can put it on your list. The route configuration doesn't understand the lambda expression here. So what you really need to do for right now anyway is this. So you just export a function that returns it, and then you can do it like this. But it basically has the same function. Is that making sense? Okay. All right. So that lets you do the 3 different levels, n different levels of router outlets. All right. My last topic, lazy loading. And it's funny, I picked the same animal that was selected for the prior talk when we want to be talking about speed. When you think about lazy loading, you might be thinking about, you know, summer in the hammock in the backyard with a nice cold beverage. But when you're talking about lazy loading, you're actually talking about making your app really fast. And so what represents fast? This does represent lazy. It kind of represents lazy and fast. So it sort of made sense. All right, anyway. To turn on lazy loading, we again use load children. And if our Lambda syntax worked correctly, this is what we would have ended up with before. To make this work with lazy loading, we just simply change that to that. We give it the path to our module, a hashtag, and the name of our module class name. And that's all we have to do to set up lazy loading, assuming we've already put it in its own separate module and we have nice child paths all set up. That's the last step in order to make it lazy loaded. Okay? All right, how many of you saw at least one of these N things that you didn't know before tonight? Anybody? Couple? Yay! Yay, all right. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it, thank you. Oh, let me add one quick thing. If you want to see code behind all of these examples, I have a GitHub repo, Deborah K/moviehunter/routing. And you can find all of the sample code that goes with this talk there. Outfits. Thanks.
Thank you. Round of applause again.
Is someone controlling it, or do I need to flip it over? I don't know. Because I know we can't have Facebook.
Awesome. All right, so Eric, you can find him on Twitter at EricSimons40. And I'm actually very, very excited to hear about this. And everybody should be using this ID after. It's basically what you're going to tell us, right?
Hopefully.
And then right after this, Eric, you can stay up here because then we'll be doing the JavaScript panel, which you can ask all the different speakers, all the different questions. So round of applause again for Eric. Thank you so much for joining us.
So hey everyone, it's awesome to be here. First of all, I want to thank Tracy and Steven for inviting us to come talk. We're pretty excited about some of the stuff we've been working on. We're super stoked to share it with you all today. So I'm Eric Simons. The other co-creator, one of the other co-creators of StackBlitz is also here. His name's Albert Pai. He's waving his hand. He and I actually grew up down the street from each other in Chicago. So we've been like best friends since childhood. We found our way out here. His brother was here. His name's Prince. Oh no, he is here. Prince. So Prince Pai. Their mom's name is Sweet Pie. Can't make this stuff up. Pretty awesome. But anyways, so we've been working together for a while. And so our day job is Albert and I are the co-founders of Thinkster.io. Maybe some of y'all have heard of it or used it. We teach full stack development. You just go on there. It's kind of like Netflix. You subscribe. A lot of the stuff is free, but you subscribe and you can learn anything you want. And there's a project we made. We'll come back to it later that allows you to, it's really cool. This open source project called Real World, if anyone's heard of it. But anyway, so we teach a lot of people on Thinkster, like a couple 100,000 a month. So like a pretty healthy number. And we've noticed this problem with our students is that they often run into issues in their local dev environment when they're trying to learn a new framework, right? They run into all these different problems. It's not even like the framework itself. It's like Webpack or something like that, right? This is a big problem because they don't know how to discern whether it's the framework or Webpack or whatever. So it really impedes the learning process. And also, you know, as developers, setting up a new dev environment is like really tough. So we found like 2 problems in our own day-to-day development and what we were seeing with our students. The first one is that setting up a dev environment was a total buzzkill. Like when you want to like quickly prototype some app and you have a great idea, like having to sit there and just like wait for this thing to like install, and then you have to like actually run the command, and it's like takes forever to compile, and it's not, then you have to like deal with getting it on. It's just this whole thing, right? Just a total buzzkill to your vibe. So that's one thing. And the other is that it's just riddled with traps. And for more experienced developers, this is, you know, just kind of an inconvenience. But for beginner developers, this is a big problem for the reasons I mentioned previously. So we wanted to solve this problem, and a lot of people out there are saying, oh, you know, why don't we get VMs out in the cloud, right? And, you know, like do the server side, you know, just have a service where people can go there, they can access it online or whatever, have stuff being done server side essentially, right? Well, the problem is that in practice, it costs a lot of money to do that at any meaningful scale of a couple 100,000 people, much less a million or more people. And beyond that, the experience is usually pretty awful due to the latency of connecting to a VM, and like usually the instance that you're connecting to is slower than the machine you're using to connect to it. So it's just like the end experience ends up being, you know, about the same as what we have to deal with over here, right? So Albert and I, you know, had this realization one day, was that most of the tools that we use are written in JavaScript. You know, they access FS or whatever, but it's all done through JavaScript. So couldn't you just like copy pasta, you know, this code from like Webpack or whatever into a browser and like make it work, you know? And so we, you know, my co-founder and I were a couple of suckers for a good challenge. We ended up sinking about 6 months of our lives into this thing, but we ended up figuring out how to more or less do this. And so just out of curiosity, who here has used StackBlitz even like briefly? Okay, like about maybe half the people. So why don't we go ahead and we'll take a peek at this thing. So I'll just go over some of like the basic functionality that we've got in it. So as you can see, it's an online VS Code IDE for Angular and React. So let's go ahead and create an Angular application here with just one click, and boom, we now have an Angular environment, brand new. Yeah, pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. So I really want to emphasize, like, what you're looking at is the real deal. This is, you know, you can use it as a playground to play around, but this is just as real as it gets as compared to your local. So the same exact editing experience, the state-of-the-art stuff that Microsoft's done with VS Code, we've poured a lot of that core stuff to work completely in browser. So for example, for like the TypeScript autocompletes, if I go down here and let's say I want to have platform, I'll just start typing platform browser dynamic, do the autocomplete. I can see what other methods are available. Automatically, it's just pulling this stuff in from all of the stuff in the node modules. Don't have to do anything, zero configuration, already there for you. We also have the various common functionality that we use all the time in VS Code, like go to file, so Command P. I can just type in the name of a file, so I can go to the app component, open that guy up. And what's really cool is we've got hot reloading running right in the browser. So if I edit this and say Angular Meetup, you'll see that automatically updates. Again, zero configuration. The stuff just works, right? It's pretty cool. And lastly, we have the format document. So if I go ahead and screw up some of the styling in here, I can just let the machine hopefully deal with it for me. Or is that valid? I don't know. Oh, I did not hit the button. I don't know why it's not doing that. Maybe it's valid. I don't know. Anyways, so that's, you know, so on the IDE side, we've ported a lot of the stuff that Microsoft's done there. But again, this is as real as it gets. And we're actually running a live dev server inside of the browser here. And so I can go ahead and just take this URL, pop open a new window, and automatically connects. And I can have it hanging out over there. And again, if I do any hot reloading, you'll see it happen in both sides of the pane and this window. This also allows for some really great debugging experiences. So if I open up the console, get that guy in the bottom, and I'll just throw like a console.log in here, for example. So you see it automatically pops up over here, hello world. So like instantly like that, really awesome dev experience, on par and in a lot of ways better than an actual local environment that you use on a day-to-day basis, right? So like any dev environment, we're probably going to want to import our own projects that already exist into this thing. We're going to export our project we're working on to local. And so any StackBlitz project, if you go ahead and just click that export button up here, it turns that into an Angular CLI project that you can just run locally. So we can open that guy up. And you can see inside here, it's got all of our application logic and whatnot. You just npmi and then ng serve. You're good to go. But the other cool thing is that for importing, you don't have to upload anything. You don't have to create a zip file or use any commands. All you have to do is just drag and drop. So I happen to have an Angular CLI generated project over here. And right now, this is a very skeleton scaffold of the base Angular starter project we've got. So I just am going to copy and, why doesn't this thing let me drag? There we go. All right, just drag it over here. And boom, immediately like that. We can just take files from our local file system. It'll automatically run inside of StackBlitz. It's pretty cool. The last thing I want to show on just the basic functionality before we get to some of the technology that we recently have announced and some stuff we haven't announced is some Angular specific goodness. So not sure how many of you have seen this, but anyone who uses Angular, how many people use the Angular CLI, first of all? Okay, a lot of y'all. How many of you use the generators, Angular CLI? Good number of y'all. Okay, so what's really cool in StackBlitz is that we have the Angular CLI generators and schematics completely built into this. So it's just a dream to use because all you have to do is it's one click. You just right click on the folder that you want to scaffold a new component, service, directive, module in, click, give it a name. We'll say this is the home component, hit enter, boom. You see that it automatically created a home folder with the styles, the HTML template, the actual component itself. And just like it works locally, this has already been imported and added to our ng module over here, right? So now I can go into my app component.html, and if I put, let's see what the selector is. It is app home. If I go in here and I type app home, you'll see that home works, pops up down here, and that's coming from the HTML template right in there. And so if I type in some gibberish, you'll see it hot reloads. So pretty cool. This allows you to just scaffold applications in record time. Like it is super awesome to prototype applications with Angular in this thing. That's, by the way, large part to the Angular team for the awesome tooling that they've added around Angular. It is just top notch, as you all know. But anyway, so that's StackBlitz. For everyone who's used it, not a lot of new information yet in this presentation. So, like I was saying, we originally started this. We kind of questioned, could we even do this inside of a web browser? Was this possible, right? Turns out we were able to do most of it. But the point wasn't just to get it running in a browser. We wanted this to be like the best prototyping tool, better than your local machine. So in order to be better than your local machine, what do we have to do, right? Well, it's got to be faster because that's what prototyping is all about. It's about a fast iteration cycle. You have to be faster than your local machine. And not just like by a little bit, this thing's got to scream. This thing's got to be like 5 times faster than your local machine, right? 5 times faster. And in a web browser, it's a pretty tall order. But okay, like what sorts of tasks we want to do 5 times faster? Well, how about installing packages? That's something that takes a while, running npm install, right? How many times you hit the command, went and grabbed a cup of coffee, like something we all do, and how about what comes after that? Having to rebundle your application, recompile it. You're sitting there waiting for that too. That's part of the whole gambit, right? So, we want to just eliminate the unnecessary time that's spent doing these 2 common tasks. And doing this locally with a 5x improvement would be difficult on its own. But, in a web browser, it's, substantially more difficult. And we weren't sure if we were going to even be able to do it. But we have learned a ton over the past 4 months since we put StackBlitz online. A lot of hard lessons and sweat to get here. But we think that we've come up with 2 breakthrough technologies that are actually able to solve these problems reliably and really fast. So the first one we actually announced yesterday. It's called Turbo. It's an npm client that works natively within the browser. This thing's faster by usually 5x and typically more than npm and yarn. And that's because it's really smart. it only downloads the stuff your application needs to run. And what that ends up doing, which is the primary limitation of getting the stuff to run in a browser, is that it decimates your node modules. We see up to like 2 orders of magnitude of reduction in node modules on the higher end. This thing's super, super, super efficient, which means that it's a lot faster because you're cutting out a lot of data that you'd normally be downloading in those payloads, right? And of course, it works entirely in the browser. It was built specifically for StackBlitz. So we announced that yesterday. We have a blog post that goes a little more in detail about how that works and how exactly we got to that solution. But today we're excited to unveil for the first time the work that we've done on the bundling and compiling side. And we call that Hyperboot. And Hyperboot it deals with all of the dev server and the bundling and everything in StackBlitz. And it's about 5x faster than our last implementation. And our last implementation was about as fast as Webpacker is Browserify, right? It's also got a robust loader system. So we're actually able to pretty much just dump Webpack loaders onto this thing, and it more or less works. It's really cool. You can do some pretty powerful stuff with this. And it's powered by the Progressive Web App API, specifically Service Worker and a couple of other things. I'm going to go ahead and do a demo here of what this actually means for the experience on StackBlitz. So I'm going to go ahead and X out of this. I think I'll open this up over here. So I'm going to go ahead and start another Angular project. And again, the core workflow that we really wanted to speed up, which is the one that takes the most in local, is installing packages and then rebundling and recompiling your application. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to want to just install NGRX, which is a library that probably a handful of people use. How many people use NGRX store? Yeah, it's pretty good, right? So let's go ahead and go over here. So this is just the GitHub page for NGRX store. And they tell you, like a lot of GitHub repos will just, kind of handy. They give you the command to just copy and paste. So we can go ahead and just copy and paste this. And you'll notice this has npm, the actual command and everything, -- save. So Turbo's, actually a very real npm client. There's nothing, it does most of the stuff. So we can actually just copy and paste this in here. It'll automatically parse it, install it, and immediately NGRX is now available to use in our application, just like that. It's pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and just to prove that this is working and this isn't just a scam, open this up. And I'm just going to open up the console so you can see what's actually coming out of NGRX store. So we'll go ahead and say import thing, or stars thing. I don't know what the import is from @NGRX/store. And then I'm going to do console.log of the thing. Uh-oh. That's not supposed to happen. It normally would work. Oh, is it? Okay. All right. Well, normally that would work. We've got some debugging to do tonight. But it's pretty cool. So when it does work, that is. So the key thing that's really cool about the two new things, Turbo and Hyperboot, is they've allowed us to actually start adding some really awesome features that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, because you need to be able to do on-demand installation of packages really fast. And so I mentioned this earlier in the presentation, but we have this project called the Real World Project. It's essentially mix and match front-end, back-end deployment. And so essentially, think of like 2 MVC, but front-end and back-end deployment. So you can choose Angular with Node on GCP. What's another, I don't know, Elm with Laravel, And so the API surfaces are the exact same. And you end up creating this blogging site similar to medium.com called Conduit. And it has all the normal stuff you would expect. You can view articles. It has a full authentication system. And so the API is totally open for this, for people to build implementations. So this leads me to the Angular Real World example app. So one of the cool things we've been able to do is any Angular CLI project on GitHub, you can now have it run directly on StackBlitz just by changing out the URL of github.com to stackblitz.com/github, and then /username and repo name. Go ahead and hit enter there. And this automatically just sucked down that GitHub repo. It's bundling the application, installing dependencies. Boom. just got this entire application up and running. And it's called real world for a reason. This is a big old application. This is the mother of all demo apps here, right? Open this sucker up. There's a lot of stuff going on, and that thing just loaded in like 5 seconds flat, right? So this thing's pretty fast. But it's super cool because this is just one of the things that's now possible it's for us to add features on StackBlitz. So that's another thing we're excited to announce today is any Angular CLI project on GitHub, you can now run directly on StackBlitz and edit it and share the link whenever have you. So we've proven that this stuff can work fast on this MacBook Pro that's got a pretty fast processor, right? But, most of the world doesn't have a machine that's nearly as fast as this. I'm sure everyone in this room has a pretty good computer to develop on, but most people don't. And so we want to make sure that we can bring the modern JavaScript development environment to even the lowest end devices, like the devices that could really only feasibly run a web browser typically. The sort of devices that the company that owns this building is selling to K-12 in the masses and just killing it there. And so we happen to have a Chromebook here with us that fits this description. It's got a massive 12-inch screen, an entire ruler length. This thing's huge. It's got a blazing fast 1.6 gigahertz of Celeron power. And it's got less RAM than your smartphone. So this thing's really fit to be running an entire dev environment, got to tell you. And so we want it to be cheap too, right? How are we looking on price? Okay, less than $200. That includes shipping. So I think we're in good straits here. So let me go ahead and pull that out. Get this wired up. I'm gonna this over to the camera while I do this. Okay. All right. So this is Chrome OS. Those of you who haven't seen it, it's a web browser as an operating system, and it's pretty neat. There's no local file system, no terminal, none of the stuff that you would really need on a day-to-day basis. But let's go ahead and let's see if the internet's connected. It looks like it is. All right. So let's go ahead and try and get Hyperboot and Turbo to work on this thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to install a package. So let's install Moment, which is typically a pretty large package, right? And hit enter. And look at that. Look at how fast that was. I'd say that's about as fast as the normal dev environment on this thing, right? Pretty cool. So now let's go ahead and actually use that. And this time it should work. All right. So import Moment from Moment. Cool. And then I'm going to change this out to say, I think it's like Moment dot from now. Look at that. Pretty cool. On this thing, right? It's pretty neat. So works on Chrome OS. So you can reasonably be talking about K-12 being able to actually learn how to do modern web development with just a web browser, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to switch to my Mac here. Okay, so that's all we really came here to talk about today. But is everyone here good at keeping secrets? Yeah, you are. All right, we got some cool stuff we're working on in 2018. So one of the things that should be landing pretty soon is OTA hot reloading. So the ability to actually give the person a StackBlitz URL on the other side of the planet, and as you type, they're getting that update applied locally to their mobile device, their desktop, whatever. You want to make a website for your mom, show her while you're developing it in real time, you can do that. Perhaps something more practical, like you have a client that wants to see this color versus that color, just change the color, boom, they have it in their hands. Really neat. Real-time collaborative editing. We all have teams we work on. If we're prototyping, usually it's not just alone if we have an idea. the ability to send a link, and just like Google Docs, you're working on it with them together, and you're seeing their changes get applied in real time into your preview. And one-click deployments to Firebase and Google Cloud. So immediately being able to go entirely from having an idea, just prototyping it out, to saying, you know what, I want to share this with the world, and I want to scale it on Google's infrastructure, right? All within your web browser. So pretty excited for that. And we've got a whole bunch of other stuff coming out. So stay tuned, and feel free to hit us up on StackBlitz on Twitter, me personally, or come join our Discord channel. We have a link to it on the StackBlitz.com homepage. So yeah, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask, and thank you for having us.
I wanted to go ahead and invite back up John and Steven and Deborah. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you.
Oops.
Oh, sorry, I just never got a seat.
Here you go. I'll give this to you. Okay, questions. What questions? Yes.
You see yourself scaling towards things like size might have extra multi-company.
Can you repeat the question too? Repeat the question.
For me,
Yeah. So do you foresee StackBlitz in an enterprise environment, which might have things like internal GitHub repos and other things which make it harder to do some of the things you're showing here?
Yeah, definitely. As we were building out a lot of the technology, I mean, scalability has been scalability and performance has been a top concern of ours, but also the ability to be able to run this stuff like on-prem at some point for people. Because right now, like our Turbo actually is able to resolve GitHub dependencies as well. It's not strictly limited to just what's in NPM. So yeah, it's totally possible to point that at different registries for like private NPM registries. It's probably possible to point that at private GitHub repos. So yeah, like we're definitely gonna at some point hopefully be able to get this thing into like enterprises and whatnot.
Next question. Yes, my friend.
So since StackBlitz, since I've taken a look at it, I've noticed that you can only look at one page at a time. Is there any future plans to put functionality with tabs just like the other IDEs and such? And it's also going off of the idea of could make it more enterprise scalable. And is there also plans to also make a mobile app for it so that people can program it off of their iPads?
Totally. Okay, so the question was, is there a plan? Because right now on StackBlitz, you can only view one file at a time. You can't have multi-pane editing, right? And the other question is, are we going to have a mobile app? I think the answer is yes, very soon for the first. And yes, we'd love to. You can use it on an iPad right now. Actually, we actually have people that do. So yeah, that's definitely possible today. But I think like mobile, that's kind of like a lot of people call it like the holy grail, right? Being able to code on your iPhone. You know, I don't know. We'll see. I'd love to if we can figure out how to do it. I'd love to do it.
Is StackBlitz open source?
So yeah, we're open sourcing parts of the core technology. I mean, the hard problem that we face is like it touches a lot of stuff, right? So we're dealing with basically a brand new IDE. This stuff doesn't copy pasta, right? Like you can't just take this thing, put it there. There's a lot of custom glue that's required. So it's not it's just the IDE. We had to invent a new sort of package manager, a new devs, like everything's new. So the problem is that we have an incredible amount of API churn just because there's a lot of scope that we have to cover. The good news is that we've been working on this for about a year now, and probably within the next 4 to 6 months, I think we'll be at a point where a lot of our APIs internally have like stabilized. We're planning on open sourcing stuff immediately though within the next couple of weeks. But yeah, like most of the core stuff, we're doing it because we do want to open source it. So.
Yes.
Oh, like being able to have private projects? Yeah, you know, it's one of those things that would probably take me 30 minutes to do, but I just keep getting bogged down in other stuff. So just keep pinging me until I do it. Because I want that too. I just keep getting tied up in bug fixes and other features and whatever have you. Like tonight, I have to go home and figure out why that didn't work, you know, which is very rare. Normally that's normally it does work.
Yes.
Hi. I had a question about the PWA.
Yeah.
Yeah, so multiple data sets that you're trying to resolve, and then order those data sets, the sequence, and because they're the sequence. How would you do that in particular? Prescribe way resolver.
I think it's.
Is it?
So the question had to do with order-dependent resolution of route resolvers, correct? Okay, so one of the things that you could definitely do is have one resolver that performed whatever set of operations that you needed, and then use reactive extensions, you know, your observable operators in order to, you know, wait for all of them to be finished. But that's going to really depend. Or do they have to be independent resolvers, or could you put them all in one? Or would they all be on the same route? Okay. I don't know of another way to do it. Do you? Because if you put them all on your resolver, they're all done sequentially. They're not done, or not sequentially. They're not done sequentially. They're done at the same time. If you have multiple resolvers.
Yeah, I would build, I wouldn't necessarily use resolvers for that. I would have a services layer that's responsible for gating the access to the information and do it that way.
That's a good idea.
Next questions. Yes.
I have two questions for John for offline person applications. What keeps you up at night in terms of the feature you don't have in the offline first toolbox? Second question, have you played around with the periodic sync and background sync APIs?
Yeah, so for the first one, it's not, this might be a cop-out answer. It was actually what we were just talking about. Like, I get what keeps me up at night is like, is just problems with service workers in general. Like that's what keeps me up at night. Like having trouble like invalidating them, or like people getting stuck with bad content, or like, you know, anything. Like I worry about the states that you can get yourself into with offline stuff in general, more than like features, because I find that like, at least so far, like we were talking a little earlier about like how do you do like if you allow a bunch of things. So in the past, I've done things where like you know, you queue all your actions in like IndexedDB or something like that, right? And then when it gets back online, you start like executing those in order, which can be really nice depending on like how, but you can run into problems, right? Where like if the source of truth has like changed, like if you try to edit something, but it was already edited and saved, something like that. We were kind of talking about that earlier, and I was like, that one I'd let people do it. And then I would just have an error queue as well. And then when you get back online, it was like, actually like this edit, we weren't able to do it, you know, whatever. But the bigger thing I worry about is like all the many like pitfalls or like foot guns or whatever with like service worker, with cache invalidation, with like things changing basically. And then yeah, as far as like periodic sync and things like that, like there's so much cool stuff. I haven't played with it as much as I'd like to. There's so many cool APIs like right now that are like kind of on my list of like things that I really want to test out and add in. I haven't really gotten around to it too much though.
Other questions? Yes.
Can we add dependencies directly from the GitHub URL?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that right now. If you just take, let's see, what is it? Yeah, I mean, if you take the literally the GitHub URL and paste in the dependencies, I think you need to include the hash of, it's like how npm does it in package.json, URL, hashtag, the release tag or whatever, it'll install it.
I have a question for everybody. So how do you guys keep up? What is the best way to keep up with all of it? Like, you know, keep up with the latest changes. What?
Twitter's good.
Twitter's good? Yeah. How much time do you guys allocate to just playing with the new technologies and the new releases?
I dedicate about half an hour to an hour a day,
That's
which
pretty good.
is a lot.
Yeah.
I know that's a lot.
I feel like for me, it really ebb and flows with jobs that I have. Like when I started at Twitter was like actually kind of a rut for me because we were still on this like really big old legacy like Scala jQuery app, and I felt like I wasn't doing much like cool stuff. We were just like working on, and so it's like sometimes it's tough and it's like takes a lot of privilege. But if you can get a job where you're working with stuff, it just becomes a lot easier to like justify like time, or like I'll build a little open source thing because it's something we need at work, and then you know what I mean, like there's all this cool stuff that you can get yourself into. So I think it depends for me like how much cool stuff I get to do in my day to day.
Yeah, you know, I got to tell you, I know a lot more. In the past year, I've learned a lot more about what works under the hood in developer environments than I ever wanted to know. And I don't know, this whole thing started off as a side project for us. And maybe it's just how I learn, but I learn best when something's just really intriguing to me. So I think finding stuff that you think is cool, reading the source code of it, like having that intrinsic interest is, for me, has been a lot more powerful than trying to stay up to date. And it's, yeah, I've learned way more than I ever thought I would have in the past year. So find something cool that's interesting and just read the source of all of it, you know?
Any other questions for the panel? Yes.
Can I ask a minute question?
Yes.
Sure.
How do you become a Google developer expert?
How do you become a Google developer expert?
I feel like winning trivia, you should kind of give it to them. But
so you become a Google developer expert by being nominated. So you have to find another Google developer expert who says, yes, this person belongs in the community. And then you're basically, we're in general looking for people that are speaking at conferences, writing code, writing blogs, communicating, being social, and really just supporting the community overall.
And you can actually apply now. So there's I don't remember the URL.
That's invite only.
Oh, is it? Ooh, oops.
Anyone you invite is by default nominated.
I did not know that.
So you're on track, I'd say. You're on track to become one someday.
What about me?
Deborah and I are both GDEs.
You're a little old.
It's the glasses, huh?
And I just wanted to add to the how do you keep up thing. I think like it's really important for your mental health to not conflate, like when you follow a bunch of people on Twitter and like you have like 1,000 people and like a lot of them are experts at one thing. It's like easy to conflate that all of them are experts at all the things and then look inwards and be like, I'm not keeping up with any of the, and so it's like really important to be like, none of us are like we're like the same people that give talks, attend talks to learn. There's tons of holes, right? Like if you like, oh man, that person knows everything about Angular, but like, there's a bunch of other cool stuff. So like, don't ever be too hard on yourself either, right? Like just find one thing that's like kind of cool and try to explore that as opposed to like getting just bogged down.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. Do we have any job announcements? Anybody want to make any job announcements? Yes, we have one person want to make job announcements.
Sure. By chance, we are hiring software engineers. JavaScript, Angular, we are in the shop. Software engineer position. The company name is Aconex. It's in San Francisco. We are in collaboration projects for construction company, Australian company. We are headquartered here. Almost 500 people all over the world. Come and find me. I will give more information. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We hope to see you at the next one. I believe the next Modern Web and Angular one is going to be sometime in Feb. So
Angular should be second Wednesday of January.